New Mexico territory. Late autumn just after first frost. Morning arrives like a held breath, a cold, wind-bitten hush along a one-street town where the dust moves slower than the men. The wind tugs at shutter slats and slips beneath doorframes, a thin blade of air that makes the lungs remember old winters, and the body stiffen without asking permission. On the courthouse steps a man stands as if the stone were a shoreline, and he were deciding whether to wade in. His face is marked the way land is marked. Not pretty, not dramatic, just real. A thin seam of scar curving toward the jaw, a sunburned ridge across the cheekbone. The brim of his hat hides most of his eyes, but not the shadows beneath them. He studies nothing and everything, the water barrel with its split stave, the empty hitching post, the way dust beads on his boots like silt in a slow river. People pass, and they do not pass. Paces shorten, conversations thin, glances harden into decisions. Guilt is assigned the way brands are burned, quick, public, permanent. Someone clears a throat and looks away. Someone else watches long enough to be cruel without words. The man's breathing answers none of it. It is small and careful, like a fire kept under a lid. His shoulders know the weight of eyes, and you can see the old learning in his body. Brace first, speak later, maybe not at all. He is not shrinking. He is conserving. There is a difference, and it matters. In the distance, the rope of the church bell complains once, a slow, tired creak, as if the town remembers prayer but can't quite ring it. Though no service is called, no hymn offered to hold anyone together, a cloud slides over the sun, and the street softens to pewter. The wind gathers grit and lays it gently against his coat, as if even the dust wants a place to belong. He does not move. He does not have to. A life can be told in the stillness between two choices. He lowers his chin and the brim drops a little more. That small shelter is all he can afford. His hands come up, not in surrender, not in plea, only to find the edge of the hat. Calloused palms, cracked knuckles, a thin white line across the thumb where rope once burned. The fingers hold the brim the way a drowning man holds a plank. Steady, not desperate. They tremble, then steady again. Breath in, breath out. The quiet practice of the nervous system returning from the cliff. He learns his breath the way some men learn scripture, one line at a time, repeated until it holds. Across the street, a woman pulls her child a little closer, not harshly, just enough to say, "The world is not safe and I don't know where the danger sits." A mule's ear flicks. A shutter claps once, and then thinks better of it. The man listens with more than hearing. He listens with skin and blood and the ache inside his jaw where he keeps the words he will not spend. He tastes iron from a night he did not sleep. He feels the courthouse stone through the leather soles, cold climbing into his bones the way a verdict climbs into a name. Everyone knows the charges. No one knows the truth. Between the two, a life can be lost if no one bothers to stand still long enough to see. Today he is trying to be seen without asking for it. If there were mercy, it would look like warm hands or a door left open or a voice that says, "Sit." There is none of that. Not yet. There is only weather and memory and the simple faith of standing where he is supposed to stand. He thinks of his father's knife, skeletoning venison by lantern light, of a creek in flood that once taught him how small a man is when the earth decides to move, of a girl's braid cut short for fever, of a fence line he mended after fire. Not confessions, not defenses, only the honest ledgers of a life. He has carried them here because a court asks for facts, but a soul asks for witnesses. Sometimes they are not the same. He knows this. He feels it in the old ache in his ribs where a boot once landed, in the newer ache behind his eyes where the nights have been long. A fly taps the courthouse window and taps again. The sound is small and foolishly persistent, the way hope is. He lets his jaw unclench. He lets his shoulders drop a finger's width. This too is a choice. The town will call it weakness. His body will call it room. The brim shades his eyes, but you can see the shift, the micro-weather inside a man when he refuses to let contempt decide the climate. He is not praying exactly. He is doing what prayer sometimes is when no words will come, counting breaths, naming what he can feel, letting the ground hold what his hands cannot. Dust blows past his boots. The bell rope creaks again like an old joint remembering motion, and the sound finds him the way a friend might find a porch in rain. A rider splashes through a shallow puddle left from last night's brief storm. A shopkeeper flips a sign in the window from open to closed, and then back to open, a little performance of power that almost makes him smile. Almost. Somewhere, a dog coughs on the cold and settles. He watches the steam of his own breath and notices that it is steady now, less like smoke, more like fog that stays low over a river and does not hurry to leave. This is how resilience looks in a place like this. Not speeches, not fists, not blazing eyes. Just a man with a scar, learning the slow mercy of not bracing for every blow. He waits because he has to. He waits because sometimes waiting is the cleanest form of courage. The brim under his fingers grows warmer. The stone under his boots grows familiar. When footsteps echo from inside the courthouse hall, they sound like verdicts. Learning to walk, he does not turn toward the door. He lets the sound come to him. The town has already decided his guilt long before the trial. That is their ritual, their way of staying safe in a world that is mostly wind and rumor. He does not argue with ritual. He makes a different one. The hat brim, the breath, the ground. He says nothing to the men who pause to measure him and then move on. He says nothing to the woman who looks too long and looks away. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the place where the heart can move without being watched. He knows this, and if he forgets, he has the scar to remind him, not a shame, not a banner, simply a map of where he has already gone and somehow returned. The creak of the bell rope fades. The town exhales. He lifts his head a fraction, and for a heartbeat the brim no longer hides his eyes. They are clear, river dark, unbroken, not defiant, alive. The dust drifts and settles as if listening. Whatever happens inside those doors will come. For now there is weather and breath, and the practice of standing upright in a place that would rather see him bow. He lets his hands fall from the hat. They hang at his sides, scarred and honest, ready to lift when the time asks, ready to open when mercy shows itself, ready to hold the edge of a life that has not been claimed by anyone but him. The morning is still cold, but it is not empty. It holds him, and he holds, quietly, in return. The rain from the night before had left the street damp, the mud clinging to boots like a weight meant to slow a man down. He walked steady, though each step felt heavier than the last. The courthouse sat behind him now, its wooden steps still holding the heat of all the eyes that had judged him. Ahead, the one street of the town seemed longer than he remembered. Each doorway another gate he would not be welcome to pass. It began small, a shadow crossing his path, then a shoulder brushing his harder than needed. No words, just that silent push that told him, without a doubt, he was not wanted here. He didn't break stride, didn't let his hat brim lift. But something in his chest shifted, that old familiar ache rising like a splinter caught in the blood. At the general store, he laid 2 coins on the counter for coffee and tobacco. The shopkeeper's eyes didn't meet his. The man just wiped his hands on a rag and said, "We're closed," though the bell above the door had rung for 3 others before him. The coins stayed on the wood until he picked them back up, slow and deliberate, closing his fist around the cold metal. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. The air seemed thinner as he stepped outside again. His mouth was dry, not from thirst, but from holding back the words that had risen unbidden, words that could wound, words that could save nothing. He swallowed them like stones, knowing they would sit in him for days. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and went silent, as if even it knew when to keep quiet. He kept walking, boots pulling free of the mud one slow step at a time. The wind shifted, bringing the faint metallic taste of the courthouse bell's rope swinging in the empty morning air. It felt less like an ending, and more like a weight being fastened to him again, one he had no choice but to carry. The weight of the morning followed him down the street, settling into the space between his ribs like a stone that had been there all along, only now remembered. He turned the corner toward the quieter edge of town, where the road bent past the livery and the shuttered cobbler's shop. The wind moved slower here, carrying only the smell of damp earth and wood smoke from some unseen fire. On the far side of a sagging porch, a tin cup sat on the railing, beaded with water still cold from the well. A boy no more than 10 was just stepping back into the shadows of the doorway. He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't wait for thanks. The cup wasn't offered like a gift, nor placed like an obligation. It was simply there, waiting in the open air. He stopped. For a long moment he just looked at it, unsure if it was meant for him. The lip of the cup caught the pale light, the surface trembling faintly with the breeze. His hand moved before his mind decided, fingers curling around the metal. The cold bit into his palm, a sharpness that somehow loosened the tightness in his chest. He drank slow, letting the water settle into the dry spaces his throat had learned to ignore. When he set the cup back on the railing, it left a faint ring of moisture against the sun-silvered wood. He didn't glance toward the doorway. He didn't need to. Some kindnesses were too small for ceremony and too large for words. The road beyond seemed different now, though nothing had changed but him. The air felt less thin, the wind less like a warning. He walked on, not lighter exactly, but steadier, the taste of well water still lingering, reminding him that even in a place that had decided his worth, someone had made space for his thirst. The taste of well water still lingered as he reached the back of the courthouse, where the public door gave way to one that only certain boots crossed. The hallway was dim, smelling faintly of pine polish and paper gone brittle with age. At the far end, a single door stood half-closed, a ribbon of light cutting across the worn floorboards. He paused before it, listening to the muted rasp of a chair leg, the low murmur of breath behind the wood. Inside, the air was warmer, laced with pipe smoke that clung to the curtains, and the leather binding of law books lined in uneven rows. A desk sat under the window, its surface crowded but not cluttered, a gavel resting off to the side, a stack of papers weighed down by a smooth stone, and leaning against a small inkwell, a faded photograph. The boy in the picture was grinning, caught mid-movement, a scar trailing from cheekbone to jaw, the kind of scar you don't hide because it came from something that had to be faced. The glass over it was smudged where a thumb had touched too often. Bootsteps paced slowly across the room, measured but restless, the sound of a decision pacing with them. The judge's silhouette crossed the lamplight, coat still buttoned, shoulders hunched not from the cold, but from something heavier. His hand hovered over the paper on the desk as though it might burn. The man by the door said nothing. The judge didn't look at him, not yet. In the silence, the scrape of a match head flaring was almost loud. The pipe filled, the smoke curled, and the decision still sat there between them, weightier than the gavel, older than the law written on the page. The decision still sat there between them, weightier than the gavel, older than the law written on the page. And then, beyond the muffled walls, came the faint creak of the courtroom door. A few chairs scraped. The air changed in that almost invisible way it does when someone steps inside who doesn't belong, yet fits the silence perfectly. The man in the doorway of the judge's chambers didn't move, but his attention tilted toward the sound. Through the narrow pane of glass, he saw the back row, a shadow slipping into place, hat in hand. The young man who sat there could have been a reflection, save for the years between them. The same lean jaw, the same weathered skin, and the same scar running along the cheek, so precise it felt carved by the same moment in time. The boy didn't look at the judge, not once. His gaze found the accused instead, steady and unblinking, as if memorizing a face he already knew but had never met in full daylight. And when their eyes locked, it was like the air between them thickened, crowding out the shuffle of boots and the rustle of papers. Neither smile, neither frown, but something passed, something heavier than curiosity, lighter than recognition, and older than either of them could name. A silent exchange, unbroken even as the clerk shuffled his notes and the murmurs of the room resumed. The judge, still in his chambers, stood very still. Perhaps he had felt it too, that unspoken current moving across the room, knotting two people together with nothing more than the quiet insistence of their scars. And in that held silence, before any word of the trial began, the loudest thing in the room was the space between those two glances. The loudest thing in the room was the space between those two glances. It seemed to stretch the moment until even the clerk hesitated, his hand pausing above the first page. Outside, the clouds had been gathering unnoticed, and now the first drops of rain began to patter against the courthouse windows, soft at first, like fingertips testing glass. The judge took his seat, gavel untouched, voice low as he instructed the charges be read. One by one the clerk began, each accusation a slow toll, each word settling heavier than the last. The accused stood, the boards beneath his boots holding him steady in a way the air could not. He didn't shift, didn't bow his head, but listened as though each line were being carved into the floor at his feet. The rain grew bolder, tapping harder, the sound building until it seemed to join the rhythm of the words. Somewhere deep in the storm, a distant roll of thunder pressed against the windows. A flash of lightning filled the room, quick and sharp, and in that heartbeat of white light, the boy's scar in the back row gleamed again. The judge's voice caught just slightly, a falter so brief it could be mistaken for breath, but it was enough. His eyes slid once toward the boy before returning to the paper in front of him. The storm rattled the panes now, each gust pressing against the building like it might push its way inside. Inside the accused, the weather was no calmer. The charges felt less like words now, and more like the weight of every mile that had brought him here. The stares, the silences, the truths too tangled to explain. He breathed once deep, letting the sound of the rain rise between the clerk's sentences, as if the storm itself were answering in a language only he understood. As if the storm had taken its cue from the silence, the rain steadied into a hard, even fall, drumming against the windows like an unbroken sentence. The clerk's voice faded. The final charge hung in the air a moment longer, then disappeared into the sound of water rushing off the eaves. The judge sat still, eyes fixed on the paper before him, but his hand never reached for the gavel. Instead, he folded the sheet in half with slow precision, the creased line catching a faint edge of lamplight. For a breath, his fingers rested there, as if holding the weight of something unseen. Then he set it aside. When he spoke, it was not with the formal cadence of the bench, but with the plainness of a man speaking across a table. "You're free to go." No explanations, no applause, just the release, given as simply as it might be to open a door. The accused didn't look around to see who stayed seated, who turned away, who scowled. He only gathered the brim of his hat between both hands and stepped toward the door. The room made space for him, not out of welcome, but because no one wished to touch him. Outside, the air was thick with rain and earth. The ground softened into mud that gripped at his boots with each step. He moved through it without hurry, his shoulders straighter than when he had arrived. The water darkened his coat, streaked his hat brim, ran down the worn leather of his gloves. Behind him, the courthouse loomed grey against the curtain of rain. He didn't turn back. The verdict had already been carried away on the storm. The verdict had already been carried away on the storm. By dawn, the rain had rinsed the street bare, washing the dust into the low places where it would dry and rise again some other day. The air was sharp with the clean scent left behind after a long night of water on wood and earth. He walked slowly now, not because of weight, but because the morning seemed to ask for it. The sky was pale, the kind of light that made every edge softer. Ahead, on the same porch where the tin cup had been left before, the boy stood waiting. No movement, no call, just the stillness of someone who had decided to be there until it mattered. In his hands, the same cup. The metal caught the faint sun, and a drop of water slid from its rim to the boards below. The man stopped at the edge of the porch steps. The boy didn't lift it toward him. The man didn't reach for it. Instead, he tipped his hat, not a gesture of farewell, nor of debt, but of recognition. This time, the brim no longer hid his eyes. From a window across the street, a curtain moved, slow and deliberate. Behind it the judge stood, pipe unlit, hands still. He did not step closer to the glass, did not make himself known, only watched. The steam of his breath fogged the pane for a heartbeat before vanishing. The man turned away first, his boots leaving shallow impressions in the damp earth. The sound of water dripping from the porch roof followed him, a steady rhythm in the quiet morning. It was the only witness to the bond left behind, a bond neither of them would speak of, yet one that would remain, like a scar that no longer ached but could still be traced in the right light.